Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast where we are talking about learning to lighten up. And I just don't know that there is another season of, well, maybe middle school as well, but midlife and middle school, let's put those together. I think both of those times in life, we really need to learn how to lighten up, maybe not take ourselves so seriously. And we are so excited because joining us in the conversation today, really one of the experts on this is Molly Stillman. She is the host of the Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder podcast. She's also a sought after speaker. She has been blogging since 2007. So I really believe she's in the OG camp of blogging. Still Being Molly is a community for women who love ethical style, clean beauty, parenting, funny stories, and serving in their communities. Her deep passion really lies in inspiring women to know they were created on purpose, with a purpose, and for a purpose, which I love so much because yes, yes, yes to all that. She lives with her husband, John, her children, Lily and Amos, and various animals on a small farm in Durham, North Carolina. She also drinks Diet Coke, which we were just chatting about in the intro. And it really does need to be said because she's got one right now. You'll see it in the screen if you're on YouTube. And it makes her mad if she doesn't have it. So she really does a lot of great organic things on her farm and makes her own bread products, it sounds like. And she still drinks Diet Coke. So welcome, Molly. Welcome to the podcast.
This is the best intro ever. Krista, Alex, thank you guys so much for having me. This is truly an honor, a joy, and a pleasure. And yes, I do have my Diet Coke. And yes, I do. I make all of my own bread products. I don't buy a single product that is like in any way remotely bread. Like I make it all. I, have a garden and raise my own chickens and eggs and all of that. And then I also, the two processed things in my life are Diet Coke and the Little Debbie Christmas tree cakes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So life is about balance. I honestly, I eat healthy in those other areas so that I can have my Christmas tree cakes and my Diet Coke.
I love it, Molly. I love it.
So I just need to know, are you a multiple Diet Coke a day person or there's that 2 o'clock?
I also drink a lot of water. So thing I started doing back in 2017. So I'm really strict about that. I drink a lot of water and then I also drink a lot of Diet Coke and it's fine.
We're talking about lightening up today, and yet it's interesting because I think we have to start with your story, which is actually anchored in hardship and some deep sadness. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. Where do you want me to begin? And so there was no shortage of humor and love and loudness in our home. But more uniquely was my mom, Linda Vandevanner, was had served as an Army nurse during the Vietnam War. And she, she went to Vietnam at a time in our country's history when, for people listening, many of you probably were young during the war or had born shortly after the war. And so, and the reality is the Vietnam War just isn't a part of our country's history that I feel like we really talk about or learn a lot about. I just happen to know a lot about it by osmosis of who my mom was. And, it was just a deeply divisive time in our country's history. And she went this naive, idealistic American girl next door. And pretty quickly, the patriotic colored glasses that she was wearing were ripped off. And, she experienced just incredible trauma and a lot during her year of service. She came home to a country who did not honor her service, who did not thank her for her service, who did not welcome her back, didn't even give her a ride to the airport when she returned home, and then a family that didn't want to hear her story. And so she was really struggling with PTSD, but didn't have the word to know how to process that. And she also, was struggling with alcoholism, and there were, drugs involved. I mean, all kinds of things. And, she would go to the VA trying to get help and try to get services, only to be turned away because, quote unquote, women weren't in NOM. And so, I mean, she was being denied her, even just her existence and her service just based on, her gender. And so that is the picture of the family that I was born into. And she, in 1983, she published her memoir, titled Home Before Morning, and it was a best-selling book, but it was also incredibly, also like the war, it was incredibly divisive, where there were people who were very much thankful that she wrote this story. For anybody listening who maybe remembers the show China Beach, which was like on in the late 80s, that show was based off of my mom's book. And so, it just very quickly, she found herself defending her story. There were people that were just dragging her name through the mud. She nearly bankrupted my parents. They met and got married in 1984. I was born in 1985. And my early years of my childhood were watching my brave, strong, incredibly resilient mom fight for what she knew was right, fighting for the rights of women veterans, fighting for acknowledgement for service, fighting for access for medical care for women veterans and their children. So much. And also just for the acknowledgement of what she shared was true. And then it all came to a head in the fall of 1994 when she was diagnosed with a rare, as in like 4 other people in the world have ever been diagnosed with this, autoimmune collagen vascular disease that was attributed to her exposure to Agent Orange. I was 9 years old at the time. And overnight, our lives changed. She went from being a woman who ran marathons and did Outward Bound and was, just this active. She was the night nursing supervisor at our local hospital. I mean, she was just, a powerhouse, strong woman. And overnight, the disease just took everything from us. Her family became estranged. We had mounting medical debt. And I was going through the most formative years of my life with a chronically ill parent. And the doctors, unbeknownst to me at the time, but the doctors had told my parents that she would have about 2 years to live. She got 8. She did finally pass away unexpectedly, but she did. The disease did finally take over in the fall of 2002, which was actually my senior year of high school. And that was the catalyst for literally that event, that singular event of losing my mom was the catalyst of the rest of my life. And it's kind of crazy. Like when I really, really think about it, and writing this book has been a lesson in how one singular event can alter the course of our entire lives, because I can trace every, where I am right now. I can go backwards, and the windy, rocky path of my life can all be traced back to that moment, because it led me into a period of isolation, depression, darkness, eventually into financial debt, after I received a surprise $250,000 inheritance on my 21st birthday, to blowing all of it, and ending up just in a really, really dark season, until I came to know the Lord in the fall of 2010. And then kind of that's where the story takes a turn. But that's the 36,000 foot view of a very complicated, unique upbringing, for sure.
Well, I think it's good context for us as we talk about this conversation, because sometimes when people are in the middle of a hard thing, this sense of lightening up or finding laughter or joy in the middle of hard things can feel like, oh, but you just don't understand what I am going through. You don't know what it is to carry the pain that I'm carrying. And I think you've had a lot of seasons of pain that maybe that defining moment took you down some different decision paths that are probably a combination, I'm just putting this on you so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a combination of choices that you made, feelings that you had, responses that were out of your control, like the whole menu of things
Right.
were there. And in the middle of that, you learned some things about coping and about walking in this tension of what it is to be a person, which includes joy and pain at the same time. I mean,
Right.
we're always kind of balancing that out. How did you learn about that as you were kind of going through all of these different stages? And was it when your faith became part of your story, or did you learn about that before?
I love that question so much. Because that is, I mean, that right there, what you just said is the heart of really what I do, period, but really the heart of this book. Um, is that yes, this is a memoir. So this is my story. However, this is all of our collective stories. Like this is the human experience. If we are blessed to live long enough, we all experience suffering and
Mhm.
celebration and heartache and joy and grief and often in the very same moment, often within the very same hour. Like it's not it doesn't have to be an either or. A lot of times it's the both and so that's really the heart of it, is helping others see through just maybe the unique lens of my story, that you too, where you listening, wherever you are, like it's okay to actually sit in that tension of the both and that there is hope on the other side, that there is healing that is possible. You don't have to be stuck there. So I just wanted to share that, because that really what you said is the heartbeat of what I do and why I wrote this. And to answer your question, as far as like when did I learn it, I think I learned it in layers, in different with different perspectives. The first being growing up again with the parents that I had. These were parents who were just funny, and they took what was in front of them seriously, but they never took themselves too seriously.
Hmm.
I mean, my dad to this day, I mean, is just one of the funniest people. He's going to be 80 this year. And he is just one of the funniest people I've will ever know. Like there's just not really a person on planet Earth that is as funny to me as my dad. Like actually, like here's a quick like little glimpse. Again, guy's gonna be 80 this year, and he has like a lot of like he's kind of all out of giving a crap. You know what I mean? Like, he's just kind of living his retired life. And I told my dad, I was like, I really want to interview you on my podcast. Like, I just think it'd be really fun to do a podcast episode with my dad and like just have my dad come on and tell stories. And but I had him actually fill out like the little calendar thing for scheduling it, because I was like, it's just going to be easier if you fill this out. I was like, you don't have to fill out the form, but just that way it's on my calendar. Nobody else can schedule at that time, and we'll just do it that way. And he was like, okay. So then I get the email last night that when he scheduled it, and in his bio, it literally just says, I have a great personality and I make all my own clothes. Like, it's just such a like what? That's your bio, but like that's my dad's sense of humor. And so I always I had parents who experienced deep pain and tragedy in their own lives. They met later in life. They were not their first marriage. My mom had been married once before. My dad had been married twice before. They were both recovering alcoholics. So they got married. My dad was 40, my mom was 37. And they came into their marriage with a lot of baggage, like a lot of life baggage, but a similar outlook on life of finding the joy. And especially when my mom got sick, I really witnessed this firsthand about how and nurses in general, like if anybody listening is a nurse, I'm not a nurse, but my mom was. And so nurses in general have a bit of a macabre sense of humor, if you know what I mean. And so like that coupled with everything else, they're very hard to offend. Um, and so I watched them in the midst of times of deep grief. I watched them like make jokes. And so here's a great example. Have any of you ever seen the movie Airplane? Like the
Yeah,
classic, yeah,
100%.
100%.
1980s. I was watching Airplane multiple times in
Multiple
a
times. Okay.
week.
So
Yeah.
it's my family's favorite movie. And I remember probably the first time my parents showed me that movie, I was probably 5. Now I look back, I'm like, maybe they shouldn't have showed it to 5-year-old me, but whatever. It was our favorite movie. I've seen
And
it.
it was the 80s.
And it was the 80s. It was a very different
Mhm.
time. My mom was handing me glass bottles of Diet Coke at like my second birthday. So it was, just a very different time. And so there's like that. That movie was so entrenched in our family culture. Like I have it memorized from start to finish, like the entire movie. I could act it out for you. Well, like there's the scene where the girl on the plane who is sick is, like tied up to the IV bag, and the flight attendant comes over and she's going to sing a song on her guitar. And so she sits there, and then the whole plane's clapping, and then she knocks the IV out of the girl's arm. And so everybody's singing, but then the little girl, like her face is going into a fish, like fish face, because she's like disconnected from the IV. Okay, so it's like this very iconic scene in this movie. So I tell you that because like great example is my mom was in ICU. She is literally on a ventilator. She is fighting for her life. But she's awake. She is lucid. She's paying attention. And I remember like we're in the ICU room with her. Nurse comes in to change her IV bag and unhooks the IV. And my mother, hooked up to a ventilator, does the fish face. And like,
okay, stop it. She does not.
And like makes a gesture, like reference to that scene. And it was this moment of like, of course, like we're all laughing. She starts laughing, but like she's on a ventilator, so it's not like it like hurts. And I remember this so vividly. And that right there is like a great microcosm of like, and my dad's just like shaking his head at her, like, Linda, really? Like, what are you doing? But that is how they were. And then there's a chapter in the book that I won't spoil it, but it's probably one of my favorite chapters because it's one of my favorite stories of my parents, of them kind of poking fun at their own upbringings. But again, in a time where my mom's in a wheelchair and she's in a lot of pain, and she's really struggling. She's just holding on to every last bit of hope, and the two of them kind of egging each other on in this kind of what would be a really painful, dark moment, but they're finding the humor in it. And so I that was modeled for me. Now, some people might interpret that as like, oh, well, they weren't dealing with what was in front of them. They were, but they also knew the gift and the healing nature of laughter. There's scientific evidence that shows that like smiling, laughter, joy is actually healing to the body. I mean, Proverbs 17:22, like laughter does the heart good like medicine. God gave us that gift, and my parents used it well in a time when they were facing deep hardship. So that was certainly modeled for me. And then I also, at times, used humor as a coping mechanism and wasn't dealing with what was in front of me, and was not facing my grief head on, and was not acknowledging the mistakes that I had made. And instead, I was covering up what was actually going on the inside with humor and making people laugh, and just trying to put on a facade, so to speak, of everything's fine, I'm great, we're all great. So I experienced both ends of the spectrum, but I mean, I could say honestly that it obviously was modeled for me from a very early age, but as I've grown up, I've learned how to do it in the right way, and also what's an unhealthy way.
Yeah, I see it sometimes as a release valve when things are really heavy. Like if you're thinking about people at a funeral and somebody says a joke about the person, and it's like everyone is relieved to be able to laugh for a minute,
Right.
and that it breaks that constant grief, that constant despair in a way that can feel just like a relief, like a release valve of tension that
Yeah.
I think can be really healthy, as long as you are dealing with that. But sometimes we just need that break.
Yeah.
And I think about in a meeting too, where people are maybe tense
Mhm.
and someone cracks a joke. And usually if it's kind of self-disparaging joke, then people realize, oh, wait, we're going to be okay as a
Yeah.
group. Like this is going to we can still laugh together and we're not taking ourselves so seriously. And this conflict isn't going to define us forever. I
Yeah.
think it offers within a group setting sometimes that release.
Laughter is a great equalizer. It
Mhm.
just, it's a universal language. You go to other countries, you go to other cultures, and you might not speak the language, but you funny faces and laughter, and like that is an equalizer. And so, yeah, there's something to the understanding that that as long as you're processing whatever it is you're facing in a healthy way, that you can also have moments of levity that are often really needed. I
Mhm.
mean, my dad, like during my mom's funeral, it had just been, I mean, it'd been a beautiful funeral. My dad gets up, he's the last one to give the eulogy. And, he started off his eulogy making a joke about my mom and just everybody, making a comment about everything that the people that knew her would have gotten. And it just, the whole place just, I mean, erupted in laughter. And it was just this really sweet moment of releasing that tension. And then, of course, he went right back into the more meaningful and heartfelt piece. But there's really something to be said for the healing nature of that.
Molly, it sounds like, I mean, in your family, which is such a gift, that you have people that just have natural humor. It's just a part of who they are.
Yes.
And I always wonder, like, why do some people have that and others don't? I mean, it's just a trait, just like being athletic or not athletic, or good at math and not good at math. There's
Not
funny
good at math right
people.
here.
And yeah, amen, sister. We're like totally like relating on that right now.
Yeah.
But why is that, right? That just for whatever reason, some of us just live a little bit easier on the lighter side than others. So if someone is not funny, I want to speak to the not funny people, because I hear people say that all the time. I'm just not funny. I'm not funny. I wish I was funny, but I'm not funny. So how can they incorporate some humor and lightness when maybe it just doesn't come as easily?
Totally. I mean, actually, I think that's a great question. And I don't think it's yes, I think my family situation was unique in that we have some naturally funny people in my family. My husband, but here's like a great example is my husband is hilarious, but people that don't know him and
Mhm.
first meet him have no idea how funny he is because he's very serious. He looks very serious. He looks very stern. He looks very quiet. Like he doesn't really reveal his humor until he knows you and he's a little bit more like connected. So, sometimes you have the people that are like surprisingly funny. You don't necessarily expect them to be funny. But really what it's about, it's not about like being funny. It's about like looking at life a little bit, almost like my mom loved the word cattywampus, like a little bit like cattywampus, like a little crooked. It's just life is funny. Okay. I actually say this in my book. Like, if you can't laugh at a fart, like you're missing out on a whole lot of life. Like sometimes like a fart happens at just the worst moment. Okay. I'm 38 years old and I laugh when my kids fart. And it's just like, you know what I mean? Like, so I realize, and you didn't know that I was going to say fart on your podcast so many times. It's if everybody had a bingo card, who knows? But
I feel like this is a first for us.
I,
We've been
you know,
podcasting a long time, and this is a
I
first,
didn't know
Molly.
I
So
was going to
thank
come
you.
into this conversation and say the word fart so many times, but here we are. We've arrived. But the reality is life is funny, and our God has a sense of humor. And this is something that I will like preach until I am blue in the face. Is God is a funny God. He created laughter. He created humor. There are certain stories in the Bible that I'm like, you can't read this story and tell me God does not have a sense of humor. Hello, Balaam's donkey. Like, he had a donkey talk. The God of the universe could have showed up in literally any form, and he had a donkey talking. So like, that's funny. It's funny. When Elijah is taunting the prophets of Baal, and he's like, come on, where is your God? Maybe he's relieving himself. Maybe he's going to the bathroom. Where is he? The fact that Elijah is making bathroom jokes, like, okay, King Eglon, pretty rough story in the book of Judges. My kids think it's the funniest story in the Bible. And it's a really brutal story of a very fat king getting stabbed through the stomach. But then his servants think that he is relieving himself, and so that they don't go in and get him right away. These are stories in the Bible. And you can't tell me that they are not included for a variety of reasons, but also because there's absurdity all around us. So I realize that maybe these are random examples, but it's looking at, sometimes there are parts of life that we take way too seriously. And it's just like, yes, there is enough death and war and destruction and heartache and brokenness in this world. Yes, for sure. But also, like, God created us to like look at, make, when we see a newborn baby and we're making like crazy little faces at it. And like, if you really, like, I always kind of joke that like, if aliens existed and they like came down to Earth and they saw a bunch of adults talking to these tiny humans, like we look ridiculous, but like, it's silly. There's joy in it. Like the giggle of a child, that lifelike, or that childlike nature. I mean, I think it's, again, no accident that Jesus loved kids so much, because he's like, let the little children come to me, because kids are funny. Kids are funny and they don't take themselves too seriously. I mean, my kids crack me up. They are hysterical, and they're just existing. They're not trying to be funny. So that's part of like why I'm answering this question this way, is because like my kids are not trying to be funny. They just are. And it's because they're not actually attempting to. They just see life with wonder and excitement, and everything is new. And there comes a time in our life where we kind of transition out of that childlike phase, and all of a sudden we become adults, and we lose that sense of wonder and joy and laughing at farts and burps and like bathroom humor. And like, you know what I mean? Like, yes, we want to be mature to some extent, but like also at the same time, like what happens to us when we lose that sense of childlike faith within us, and the childlike way of looking at the world, that Jesus actually in a lot of ways calls us to. Like, unless you become like one of these, you will not enter the kingdom of God. And I think a lot of it stems to the childlike faith of kids, and the innocence within them, that we lose when we get into adulthood. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I really do. I think we get too serious. I think we take ourselves too seriously, and we just get serious and we stop playing. I mean,
Yes.
you look at kids, well, all the way to adults. I mean, people build relationships through play. That is like well known. It's well studied. It actually is what we experience. We don't have to study it because we experience it. The relationships are often built through play, but we stop playing. Yeah. And so, even as I think about, okay, let's get practical. Like, what are some practical ways that people can lighten up and bring more laughter into their lives? And that is one. Just carve out actual time in your schedule to do fun things, and that are going to bring a little more of that levity into your life. I mean, what are some ideas that you have, Molly? Because I'm assuming you're pretty creative with that.
Well, so, I mean, here's a great example of just, I'm not saying this is the end all be all, but I'm just giving you an example of like, what does it look like in our family, practical everyday life? So yesterday I had a long day of work. I work from home, obviously, but yesterday I had meetings all day out of the house. Unbeknownst to me, prior to like last Friday, I did not realize my kids were not going to be in school yesterday because when we were recording this, my kids were out of school because of primary day in our state. So like the school was closed because of elections. And so I was like, well, shoot, my kids are going to be home alone all day. My husband works from home, but he works up in a barn. So like, I was like, my kids are going to be like in the house by themselves all day. And I felt so bad. And so I get home and I had still more work to do because I've been out of the house. So I didn't like actually have, and I was overwhelmed because now I have to like get dinner ready. I've got laundry to fold. I've got dishes in the dishwasher that's got to get emptied. I mean, it's just like the house needs to be vacuumed because the kids had been inside the house all day pretty much by themselves. Again, my husband home, but not in the physical house. There's popcorn everywhere. There's snack trash everywhere. And I could have really easily in that moment kind of lost it and been like, I'm overwhelmed. I've got dinner to cook. I've got work to do. I've got, XYZ, all of the household tasks. And I could have like allowed it to steal my joy. And then that in turn is just going to like pour out onto my kids. And like, that's not fair to them. And so I made a choice and I looked at my tasks. I looked at the time and I was like, you know what? The work can wait for now. I can do it. There's a basketball game on TV later tonight. I can answer those emails during the basketball game. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I was like, kids, come here. So they came in the kitchen. We played a board game for 45 minutes and we had a great time. And then after the board game, I was like, all right, so we've got some household stuff that we got to do. We got dishes to do. We got laundry to do. I got to cook dinner. We're going to do it all together. And I was like, but we're going to have fun while we do it. And so I got a record player for Christmas. And so I was like, Lily, you get to pick out the record we're going to jam to. And she was like, all right, mom. So she goes over and she picks out the record and she puts on the record and we turn the record up and we're just dancing in the kitchen. And then I was like, all right, who wants this task? And it was like, me. And then who wants this task? Me. And I was like, all right, I'll do this. We're going to do it together. And so we tackled boring everyday tasks that I didn't want to do, but we did it together and we made a game out of it by putting on a fun record and we had a dance party. And then, when my son was like getting frustrated that he couldn't figure out how to roll out the tortillas, I was like, that's okay. And I flicked some flour in his face and it made him laugh. And like, it's not taking ourselves too seriously in the mundane everyday. And so like, yes, there are those moments, but like, that's just a small little example of like, I had to make a conscious choice of, I could have been frustrated that there was trash and popcorn all over the living room. Like it just, but instead I was like, no, you know what? This is a 10-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy who have been bored all day. Like they've been trying to keep themselves busy and, it's just, and it is what it was. And so, but we ended up having a great evening together and everybody went to bed happy. You know what I mean? And so though that's a little example of, but we try to just get outside and we try to just make games of things. And it's just, we're big music people in our house. So a lot of times like just putting on the right music totally changes the mood. We've raised our children right, in that they love like 90s country and like classic rock. And so like we'll put on a Queen album and like my kids know like all the words to Don't Stop Me Now. And like, you know what I mean? And so it's fun. And that really can just change the atmosphere in the room. But it starts with us and how we model this. And I don't do this right all the time. I get this wrong a lot. I have snapped at my children and been like, what are you doing? Why haven't you thrown away your trash? And this is driving me crazy. Like, but I've been working really hard to make a conscious choice to not do that and to instead include them in the process and do it in a fun way that they remember. Oh, mom was fun. Like we had dance parties in the kitchen while we did dishes.
Mm-hmm. It seems like we're talking about two different things. Humor, which is like jokes, and then just the general attitude of lightening up. Because I think humor people can have different tastes
Right.
on what they think is funny.
Mm-hmm.
I like things that are witty. Like I like the kind of smart, funny people that
Yeah.
make the side comments. And I'm like, oh, like that's what's going to get me rolling on the floor.
Yeah.
But that's kind of personal preference. Whereas lightening up is more just the outlook that we have
Mm-hmm.
as we are walking through our days and saying, okay, God, you're still God. And I can either choose to get upset about this, or I can choose to right size it in the world and be a pleasant person.
So,
Like I'm thinking about like what are the choices I offer myself when I'm
yeah.
consciously trying to lighten up? And it's like, am I the kind of person that people want to be around right now or not really
Yeah.
when it comes to a stressful situation? And usually if I'm aiming towards the person that people want to be around, I am going to carry the stressors with a little bit of lightness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my mom, so from a very early age, I remember my parents using a particular phrase or tactic. And I've tried to carry that over. And that is, you can start your day over at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched my parents do that a lot. And I remember like there would be times where, it would just be just felt like all hell was breaking loose. And my dad would either look at my mom and say this, or my mom would say this to me and say, honey, you can start your day over at any time. Like this moment can be a new day right now. But it takes conscious, and it's not dismissing or
Mm-hmm.
ignoring what has happened. So it's not being passive in that. It's being intentional in how you choose to move forward. When I was writing my book, my mom was a prolific journaler. And my dad had given me a box of her diaries. And so I had never really gone through them, but as I was writing my memoir, I did choose to go through them. And I found one particular entry from the mid to late 70s. So she'd been home from Vietnam. I think it was late 70s. She'd been home from Vietnam for, quite a few years at that point. She came home in 1970. And so, and she wrote in this entry, and I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but essentially what she said was she spent much of the first few years after she got back from Vietnam asking the question, why? Why did Vietnam have to happen? Why did I have to experience this trauma? Why aren't I getting the recognition that I feel like I deserve? Why aren't I getting the help that I need? Why? It was like a lot of like just sitting in that trauma of why. And she said, what the question better is that I should be asking is, why does it matter? What do I do with it moving forward? She was like, I can't change the fact that Vietnam happened. I can't change the fact that I have PTSD. I can't change the fact that she came home an alcoholic. Like all of that happened. So why does it matter? And what do you do to move forward? And that was what really led her on her path of healing, getting sober, writing her memoir, and healing through that process and really working through forgiveness. And I think that to your point, Alex, is, that choice, that conscious choice of even in the midst of heartache and trauma and pain and all of it is not dismissing it, but also not like staying in it forever. And making a conscious choice of why does it matter? Why did that thing have to happen for me to grow or move forward or heal, or what needs to happen from here on forward? And sometimes like it's that you can start your day over right now. You can, you know what I mean? Like, and sometimes I've started my day over 6 or 7 times, if you know what I mean. So, yeah. And to your point, and then humor, I think again, is a totally different, I'm all for advocating like my husband and I, we love comedy. So we watch SNL, we watch, we're big fans of, good stand up like Nate Bargatze and, we love The Office. And so of course, like sometimes you need that, you need a funny movie, but that's going to look different for everybody. Everybody's sense of humor is going to be a little bit different. But there's the outlook, the way you look at something is so key for just lightening up a little bit. My dad's first license plate that I remember was actually LY10UP, Lighten Up, was on his my dad's license plate for a long time.
Well, that fits. There you go.
Yeah.
But what you were saying reminds me of, I hear therapists say this a lot, that pain is not a choice, but suffering is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really interesting. Like we can choose to keep suffering over and over and over. And I think it's an interesting piece of this conversation, and we won't get into it now. Maybe it's debatable, but I do think it's an interesting idea to think about.
Yeah.
That are we just choosing kind of that negative and that, continuing to go back and back and back and back, or how can we bring some of this levity to this situation and even to a bad situation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Molly, this has been so great to have you. Thank you for being on. And
Thank
do
you for
you have
having
any
me.
last words of encouragement for people?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for what you both do and for how you guys are bringing hope to so many. As far as last words, all of us, again, will experience grief. All of us will experience pain. And all of us will experience joy, and sometimes all those things at the same time. And like I just said, the wisdom that my mom wrote in those journaling pages all those decades ago is, the better question is why does it matter? And what do we do with it moving forward? And so my prayer through this book and through the work that I do is that for you listening, wherever you are in your own journey with the Lord, or if you're feeling close to him, or if you're feeling far from him, or if you are in a season of deep pain and suffering, if you are in a season of joy and celebration, that hope is found, forgiveness is found, healing is found. There is nothing that is too far gone or too broken that can't be redeemed. And so I'm just praying that you just feel a little bit less alone, and that I'm in your corner.
I love it. Thank you, Molly.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. This is really, really fun.